Hi everyone, my name is Corme, and today I kind of want to go over the differences between Rdruid and Disc inside of Mythic Plus on the beta right now. I think both of them are really strong and really fun to play, and definitely have a really good shot of both being up in the top. I wouldn't be surprised to see both of them doing really well instead of just one meta merge where only one is good. But if you're kind of debating between which to play, hopefully this video can give you a better idea. The first thing I want to do is kind of look at their different healing and damage profiles. So I think Disc is almost always going to be able to do more damage than a Resto right now at high keys, just because they get to get away with dealing damage more often than a Resto does, and their kit is just really well suited to it. Resto can do a lot of damage, especially if they're taking things like Heart of the Wild, or if they're taking the Venthyr Covenant and utilizing both of those really well. As far as healing throughput goes, I think that Disc has a better kit for doing burst throughput, mostly because of cooldowns like Rapture and Boon, and just how their healing profile normally is. As far as Resto go, we have one big healing wide CD, and that's Tranquility. The one downside to Tranquility being that it's on a 3-minute CD and you can't move while you're doing it. The addition of things like Convoke and Frenzy can kind of help out though. Convoke can usually top your group almost all the time if you use it for that instead of damage, and you can move while you're doing that. And then Frenzy is on a 3-minute CD, and it's like a mini ERT, so it also helps with your healing in a similar way. It does also have a downside though. If you stop casting, you're gonna get stunned, and that can be really punishing in a high key. Okay, so if we're looking at sustained throughput, I think that Resto Druids definitely have better sustained throughput than Disc over long periods of time. However, I don't really think there's many dungeons where you need that. So there were fights inside of BFA, like Galvaz, Last Boss of Temple, even things like Full Call, which were pretty sustained, even though those last fight lists were kind of bursty as well. But I don't think there's a lot of fights that are like that inside of Shadowlands Mythic Plus so far. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna look at is the damage reduction both of them bring. I think that Disc have a way better kit for bringing damage reduction. So, of course, they're always just casting Power Word Shield, which is an absorb. They also usually take Lenience. Lenience gives a 3% damage reduction to everyone who has Atonement on them all the time. They also bring Barrier, which is a group-wide 20% DR for the whole group when they're standing inside the bubble. And also really important, the only way that you can get Fortitude this upcoming expansion is if you have a priest in the group. There's no more scrolls. And you would be surprised by how often 10% stam is going to save you in a higher key. And then Disc also bring Pain Suppression, which is the most powerful single target damage reduction, although it is on a 2-minute CD. So yeah, I think the Disc kit for bringing damage reduction is helping you live like those random one-shots that end up showing up in keys the higher you get is really good. For Druid, the only thing that Druid has is Ironbark. Ironbark is now on a 1.5-minute CD when it used to be on a 1-minute CD. However, it is like a permanent Stonebark, where it always increases the healing done to you while you have it on you. So it is kind of a nice little healing amp, but as far as damage reduction goes, I think Druid is lacking a lot compared to Disc in that department. Okay, so if we're just looking at both the classes themselves, so I think that Resto Druids have a lot more mobility than Disc Priests. Not to say that Disc Priests are wheelchairs, I do think Feathers is still pretty good. But there are some mechanics that looks like maybe like cheesable and dodgeable with things like Wild Charge that Disc Priests may end up struggling with. I think Resto Druids and Disc Priests have an equally easy amount, or easy time I should say, surviving things. I don't think there's as many like physical debuffs and stuff like that Resto Druids get to cheese with like bear form anymore. If we're looking at their ability to handle affixes, I think that Disc can do really well with Massive Spelling Bursting. Don't forget that this expansion, Bursting is going to scale with key level now instead of just doing like a % health. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how bad Bursting gets on a high key to heal through. And having Massive Spell on a 45-second CD, which is usually about the length it takes to kill a pack, is going to be really awesome, I think. Of course, Resto Druids are the only ones who can dispel Raging, well, along with Hunters. And I think Rogues might have some kind of Soothe as well. We haven't seen yet the full calendar. We only know 4 weeks on the calendar, so we don't know if there's going to be a good Raging week where this is applicable, but we do know there is a Bursting Volcanic Fort week. The Disc Priest is definitely going to shine during with this Massive Spell. So looking at some of the other small utilities each class brings. So a Disc Priest brings Life Grip, which they had last expansion, Mind Control, Fear, and Shining Force. Mind Control, we've seen some unique applications in the past that allow them to do really big damage numbers. Fear is a nice little CC. Shining Force is a knockback, unlike druids, they're not going to have to spec into their knockback. And then they also have Mind Soothe. So Mind Soothe is basically like a sap, but not as effective, that can be used on humanoids, but it can be put on as many targets as you want. So this might allow you to actually not have to shroud something or invis-pot something in order to skip it if you just have a priest who can Mind Soothe. Okay, so next we're gonna look at Druid. So Druid, same as last expansion, has Ursels. They also have Roar, which is a speed increase for the whole group. Then they have Stealth. This can usually help facilitate some skips, or like if your group wipes, it's usually a good tool for wipe recovery. They have access to a single target stun if they spec into Ursox. They have access to Typhoon, but only if they take Boomkin Affinity. Boomkin Affinity isn't performing that far behind Feral Affinity this expansion. They seem pretty equal. And then of course you have access to Rebirth. So there is of course the Engineering Combat Res, which they announced today, but having access to a long range, really fast castable Rebirth might actually save your key sometimes. Okay, so that's kind of just the basic differences between both the healers, but I think usually what healer is good any given season is often dependent on what else is good in the comp. So I kind of want to get into looking at what other classes are good right now and how these healers might fit into that. Okay, so right now I'm mostly just looking at the classes that have been performing really well on beta. I'm sorry if your class is not up here. So one of those is a Blood Death Knight as a tank, or a Vengeance Demon Hunter as a tank. Both those are doing pretty well. And then as far as DPS go, we have a Marksman Hunter, Destro Warlock, Mage, Rogue, and Demon Hunter. So Mage I think is really important this season because then you always have a less in the group. They also nerfed drums to the ground, so you're gonna want to have an actual less in the group if you can. And it's also your only way to access Arcane Analogs because again, there's no more scrolls. Hunter also does bring a lust, however they do have to put their pet out when they're a Marksman Hunter, and that causes them to lose DPS, so it's usually preferable to have a mage that can lust. We have Destro Warlock, that's access to another res if you want it. Rogue, I don't think rogues are as required as they were in past seasons, but they are still doing really well because they're Blizzard's favorite child. And then Havoc just has good survivability, of course. Okay, so normally you would just look at this and throw together a comp with all the little things you want, but in Shadowlands we have this thing called Covenants, and unfortunately in Mythic Plus they added all these things to each dungeon where you're basically always gonna want to have someone with that covenant for that dungeon. So basically I kind of want to try and put together groups where you have one of each covenant, so because you want to be able to do one key and then go to the next key without being at a disadvantage, and just having a group that you can, or like a comp that usually works all the time for every dungeon instead of having to switch things up. So that's what we're going to try and do. So Disc Priest is pretty much always going Kyrian. Resto Druid can get away with Venthyr or Night Fae, and then all these other DPS and tanks usually have like one covenant they like, except for mages. Mages, as long as they're not Necrolord, they don't really care what they are. So they're kind of like the flex that can maybe change depending on what ends up being the meta to be that other covenant to fill in that blank for the group. Okay, so first thing I want to do is look at Disc Priest comps with a DK. So the first one is pretty similar to what we're seeing on live right now, which is Mage, Hunter, Rogue, and then of course instead of the Prot Warrior we have the Blood Death Knight, and then we have Mage, Lock, Rogue, and then this is another comp that we've seen really commonly throughout the entire last expansion, which was Rogue, Demon Hunter, and Mage. And then this down here is a no Rogue comp because like I said, I don't think Rogue is as required as it used to be. I don't think it's as strong as some of the other comps, but it's definitely an option. And then if we look at Vengeance Demon Hunter comps, it's pretty similar. The only thing I didn't include here was the no Rogue comp because I don't think giving up a Rogue just to add another Demon Hunter when you already have the Demon Hunter buff would ever be worth it. You'd always want that extra utility, I think. And then if we look at, and then of course you can see, like, I forgot to talk about this. So for these first two comps, you would need your mage to go Venthyr in order to make it work, whereas these second comps, they do have the Havoc Demon Hunter in here, so it doesn't actually matter what your mage brings, so these might be preferable because then you don't have to hunt down a specific mage. And then for any of these comps where we have the Vengeance Demon Hunter, the mage is pretty much always going to be required to be Night Fae. And then if we look at Resto Druid comps, because Resto Druid could go Night Fae or Venthyr, I'm indicating over here whether they need to go one of them. So this first one, it could either be the Druid goes Venthyr or the Mage goes Venthyr. And this is again the same comp that we usually see on live right now, which is Mage, Hunter, Rogue, and then of course the DK. And then for the second one, we want the Mage to go Kyrian because nobody else in this group is going Kyrian if you don't have a Hunter. And then the Druid has to go Venthyr. And then the rest of these, it doesn't matter if the Druid goes Venthyr or Night Fae because it's already taken in the group. It's just required, of course, that the Mage is taking Kyrian. And then we go to the Vengeance Demon Hunter ideas. That means that Resto Druid always has to be Night Fae, and for two of these, the Mage always has to be Kyrian. So I'm a little scared for mages to see what ends up being their kind of chosen covenant, because it may actually determine which of these group comps are viable, or if all three of them stay kind of viable for mage, it'll be interesting to see which ones they pick and how they can fit into different groups and how that ends up working out. Hopefully they just end up nerfing the need for covenants in Mythic Plus. That would make this a lot easier. Okay, so next thing I kind of want to look at is not all of the dungeons, but some of the dungeons where I think that either having a druid or a disc priest might bring you some kind of advantage. Alright, so first dungeon I want to look at is the other side. So if we're looking at the last boss inside the other side, there's this debuff called Cosmic Artifice, and it's the source of basically all the damage on that fight. And I think having a Master Spell as an extra cooldown for this is really strong, because then you basically don't have to heal through it at all. You get basically 3 Cosmic Artifices per phase. It's 3 or 4, but being able to basically just like trivialize one of them is really strong for Disc Priest. And then also in the same dungeon, the other side has 3 wings, and one of them is kind of like a Mechagon wing, and this wing has some really nasty trash. And so what people are thinking the meta is going to be is that you have your healer Invispot, but Invispot may not fully get you through, and so then the druid can stealth at the end. Or druid actually might just be able to make it through without having to stealth at the end. The whole thing is that I don't think a Disc Priest could Invispot through this area and make it to the end on just an Invispot with their speed. I do think a druid could with things like dash or roar and just the extra movement speed they get from being Feral Affinity, but I don't think Disc Priest will be able to easily do that. You could probably do it though if you put like a Soul Stone on a Disc Priest, but I still think you'd rather have the druid being able to do that. Also, there's a couple mobs in here before some of the wings where I think having a Soothe is really strong, because there's some nasty enrages in this dungeon. Of course, you could bring that as well with a Hunter. Next, I want to look at Halls of Atonement. So the second to last boss in Halls right now is an insane damage check, where you have these ghosts that spawn and you have to bring them to these vessels of atonement, and there's only 4, and after those vessels are gone, when these ghosts spawn, they do a ton of damage and they're just gonna kill your group. And it's this crazy damage check where if you don't kill the boss in something like, I think it's like a set timer when the ghosts spawn, and like you have all 4 of them gone after a minute 40 of the fight. And I think having the extra damage from a Disc Priest could actually make a huge difference on this fight, as well as when you're thinking about things like them bringing power infusion for the DPS, so you make this DPS check, not just looking at the raw DPS difference between Disc Priest and Resto Druid. I don't think that's fair. I think you also need to take into account that the Priest is bringing power infusion for one of the DPS. I think Priest might be better suited to help you meet that check, because that is just like a pass-fail right there. Also, I included Ritual of Woe. It's basically the damage on the last boss. It's just like 2 tantrums, one at 66% and one at 33% health. So it's not really a damage race, it's just a lot of burst damage. Right now, you can totally cheese it on the beta to where you don't have to take most of the damage, but I think they're gonna fix your ability to cheese it, and it's gonna be some insane like burst healing you need in order to get through that. And I think the Disc Priest is a little bit better suited to heal through it than Resto Druid is right now, especially with, it's not just like a tantrum, it lasts a lot longer than a tantrum, and it does just as much damage, and it's very scary. I also think there's some really good spots where you can use Mind Soothe inside of this dungeon. You get like 80% of your trash before you get to the first boss, but in order to get to the first boss, a lot of like the meta about how to get there involves doing some skips, which I think Mind Soothe are really strong for. Also, same dungeon. First, on the first boss, there's an ability called Curse of Stone. And in order to dodge the next mechanic, which is the Shattering Leap, you need to be able to curse the person who has the Shattering Leap. Otherwise, they're just going to be stunned inside there and take all the damage. So, of course, you're going to need a decurse. There's other ways to get a decurse in the group with a mage, but it's also nice if you can decurse whoever the target is and then decurse the healer, because there's also still damage going out during this time and it's hard to heal through if you're stunned. I don't think you need more than one decurse to actually get through this, but it's definitely an advantage. The bears that soothe inside of this dungeon, sorry, the bears that enrage inside of this dungeon hurt a lot. You can stop the enrages, but oh, it's so nasty if you don't, because the bleeds will snapshot the enrage. So having a soothe inside the dungeon I think is really strong. Also, I think having Moonkin Affinity inside this dungeon is strong, because there's these mobs that do this AoE that you can outrange, and it's really easy to outrange with Moonkin Affinity because it gives you extra range on all of your healing spells, so that you can outrange so you're not taking damage but still be healing the tank and any of your melee DPS without having to do some weird positioning to make sure you're always in range of them but not in range of the mob. It's possible, it's just easier if you have the extra range. Okay, next we're going to talk about Plaguefall. So, first boss of Plaguefall, he does this big AoE. That's not really what we're worried about. I'm talking about Debilitating Plague. It's just kind of like burst healing, and also you can dispel it because it's a disease. So it's also just nice having a disease dispel for this first boss. And then if we're looking at the last boss, it's a lot of damage. And it's mostly burst healing, which again I think Disc Priest is a little bit better suited for. There is quite a bit of movement during some of the healing as well. And then I think it's really nice being able to have a disease dispel, because you get to negate having to heal someone on this. I would look at this boss a little bit like Volcall, but the AoE is not as constant and it's more intense. And then if we're looking at the third boss inside of Plaguefall, the boss puts a debuff on the tank called Cytotoxic Slash, which is a poison that increases the nature damage that your tank takes by 100% for 8 seconds. This can get really, really nasty if you don't have a poison dispel on a high key. So I think it's really nice having a poison dispel here. I don't think having a poison or disease dispel is required for either of these. They're just nice things to have that I wanted to talk about. Okay, if we're looking inside of Necrotic Wake, so we look at the first boss with Heaving Wretch. It's another disease that you could just dispel, so it's really nice. You just get to negate some of the damage on someone in there. This boss isn't super crazy, it's not a huge deal, just something to think about. And then also inside Necrotic Wake has way too much trash. You have to skip so, like you do like this little bit, and you just want to skip all of this. You maybe want to do like one pack here, but you just want to skip all of this and you just want to walk through here. So you can use Mind Soothe to get through a lot of this, and you can get right here with Mind Soothe, but then after that you'd have to Mind Soothe so many mobs to get up and over here, because the meta is then you go over here, you have someone stealth through, and you have someone get on a passenger mount and you hop on here, because you want to skip so much of this trash, because there's a required gauntlet later and you can't skip any of that trash. It's crazy, they need to fix it. Anyways, if you want to be able to do the second part of the skip, you need someone with stealth, so I think having stealth here is good. Of course, you could always just have a rogue do it. It's just worth bringing up that also a Resto Druid could do it. Alright, if we're looking at Theater of Pain, the second to last boss has this debuff called Phantasmal Parasite. This debuff did get nerfed today by 20%, which is good because it trucks. It's similar, you can kind of think of it like a Spit Gold. It just does a lot of damage, or actually it's better to think about it like the Rixa debuff, where she puts out 2, you dispel 1, and then you heal through the other. It's basically just like that. It goes on 2 people. One of those people can be the tank, or it can be 2 DPS. I'm not sure if it could go on the healer, but being able to completely negate one of them by having Massive Spell is really strong, I think. As well, there's actually a lot of trash that enrages, and also the first boss does have an enrage, where if you don't have a dispel, and she gets the shield equal to 30% of her maximum health, that's not the best, because you can't really DPS her. Something to think about though is if you do dispel the enrage, then she starts moving 15% faster than she would have without it. She usually fixates on someone and chases someone, and then you have to run. I think it's pretty easy to outrun, but I also think it's better if you could just dispel the shield and keep DPSing her. And that was basically all of the dungeons I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Again, I think both these healers are really strong and really good contenders to take the top spot in Mythic Plus X expansion. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts based on both of the healers to give kind of like an answer of a question I keep getting in my stream, which is what I think which healer is better, and I think they're both pretty good. So yeah, thank you guys.